You're in a session, the human interface, making technology decisions with a thought process around user experience. I'm Anthony Franco. I am the founder and president of a company called EffectiveUI. I'm a self-proclaimed geek. This is me at my 16th birthday, really excited that I got a solar-powered calculator. So I grew up loving technology. I went to school with technology, founded a technology company. I've probably seen over 300 successful software projects. We primarily work with large organizations, FedEx, eBay, Warner Brothers, T. Rowe Price, Adobe, Barnes & Noble, Microsoft, Adobe. So I'm coming at this with a profound love for people in the technology industry. I'm one of them. What kind of inspired this conversation was some things that I've been hearing in the industry, in my industry. I'm being told my new buyer is now the CMO. My organization's new buyer is the CMO. And frankly, that scares the hell out of me. I don't know if any of you have seen, all respect to CMOs, they're great, but any technology implementation managed by the CMO is managed with a campaign thought process. And we've seen a lot of those, had to come in and fix a lot of those. And the truth is that this is going to be bad for our industry. And I'm hoping that after today, even a little bit, you can go back armed with some language, some thought processes that your CMO is going to identify with if you're a CIO. In reality, what we've seen over the last decade at EffectiveUI is this pendulum shift of budgets and concerns from an organization where the CMO is kind of empowered and the CIO. It happens about every 18 months to 24 months. And it's because, in my humble opinion, that there's this notion of the person that's going to be using the thing, the product that they're building, and the CMO sees them as a customer, and most CIOs, most technology organizations see them as a user. And in reality, both of these organizations are missing the mark. We see this person as a person, as a human being. And to frame this conversation a little bit, I'm going to take an excerpt out of the Human Interface Manifesto just to kind of frame the conversation a little bit. This is just an excerpt. If you want a full copy, come visit us at our booth, and we'll send you a copy of it. So a quick excerpt out of it for technologists. We are perceived as keeping technology to ourselves as a struggle to maintain power, because we seek to solve problems as engineers, not as people. We have begun to believe our own press that we will inherit the earth, and our pride is going to be followed by a great fall, as predicted by the market. We must lose our technophile bigotry before we become relegated to the ranks of tech support. We must stop dehumanizing people by relegating them as users. I submit that we must elevate our goals and meet commercial and humanitarian needs of our society. We have the foundation, we have built the foundation for easy to deploy composite applications. But those applications, those in the future, will live or die on their human interfaces. My plea is to build exceptional human interfaces. For our end users, for my mom, for my sister, they don't care about the platforms that we choose. They don't care about the BPM system, whether it's SAP or IBM. They don't care about our own internal politics and silos. They care whether or not it's user-friendly. How many people here have people in the room with family members that say they're not technologically savvy? Shame on us for people thinking that they have to be technologically savvy, that they have to learn our environment. It's our job as technologists to make it transparent, or make the technology opaque, that they just get in and get out and do what they need to do. So to talk through this, a little bit of the practices that we've uncovered over the past almost decade, The main reason why technological decisions are the wrong ones is because the decision tree, the way we make those decisions, are the wrong way. It's the wrong way. So I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody. This is probably what everybody here has been having to deal with when making those decisions. But as in a business, you identify an opportunity, you define the requirements, you select a technological solution, you integrate it, and then you define the UI. If you're lucky, you define the UI. Sometimes it's just, let's skin the thing that came out of the technological box. And sometimes you issue RFPs to have this done, where you issue a technological RFP, what BPM are we going to use, what CMS are we going to use, and sometimes you ask a service provider to come in and implement it. And in reality, if the interface for our customers, the reason why we're building this is the interface, because that's what the system is to the end user. These folks don't have the power to make good decisions for you yet. If the interface is the most important thing, why do we define it last? It's always the last thing that's defined. We come in all the time in an RFP process where they say, we want you to tell us what it's going to be like. We want you to bid out the design of the interface. And we want you to bid out the research to get that interface where it needs to be. And we want you right now to tell us what CMS you're going to use. Impossible. It's impossible. Unless you want us to choose the CMS that we think that we have the most expertise in, which is fine. But without an understanding of your technological infrastructure and the customer need, you can't do it effectively. So I'm suggesting that we flip this. Instead of defining the requirements from the business need, define the customer outcomes. No more requirements documents. Define what your customers are going to get out of it. The second thing is define the interface after that. And then make your technological decisions and integrate the solution. Now, this isn't always possible because you have legacy systems. That's fine. But before you get into defining how your legacy systems are going to integrate, define the user experience first, the optimal user experience first, and then peel back, make compromises, design compromises based on what you can and can't do, but define the optimal user interface first. So using those 5 steps, that framework, I'm going to talk about the 5 essentials to success using that framework. Essential number 1, every winning solution needs a maven. And this isn't really about a technological solution, but it's a philosophy or a corporate mentality that is frankly just missing in a lot of the organizations that we encounter. And that is, everybody's trying to make sure that IT and marketing and the business product owner and customer support have a weigh-in and a committee that makes the decision on what the end user product is going to be. And you wind up with making incremental improvements at best. Where real product innovation happens in an organization is when one person lives or dies on the success or failure of that product. It needs a champion in your organization. It doesn't have to be you, but you have to make sure, if you're the CIO, that you have a person that is the champion, that they're measured on the success of the implementation of this product. Steve Jobs is overused, I get it. But he was a champion. He had the ultimate power within his organization to make changes. But you don't have to be Steve Jobs to do this. Our client at McGraw-Hill is actually the person that turned me on to the word maven. He said, I was a maven in my organization. I bulldozed through the corporate silos and championed the customer voice in our organization, championed the customer voice in the design process, championed the customer voice in the development process. He was neither a designer or a developer, but he was the product champion. If you don't have that, you're going to get a product that serves your internal needs but doesn't serve your customer. Every one of your constituents are going to be happy except for your customer. And if you're measuring the right things, it will have been viewed as a failure by your organization. If you're measuring on time and on budget, you'll probably be okay. Essential number 2, build team empathy throughout Insight. And I'm actually going to bring Steve back to make this point. He's the exception that proves this rule. So when I'm talking about empathy and team empathy, I'm talking mostly about customer insight and research. And a really great product is done from an understanding of the person that is designing and developing it, who the end user is, and what their motivations are. So Steve Jobs didn't do focus groups. He didn't run customer surveys. He didn't do ethnographic research, really. He was the user. He built the iPhone for himself. And it just happened to be what we wanted to. At least I did. Not everybody here has an iPhone, I get it, but it works for me. So he had the ultimate customer empathy. And if you're designing a customer self-service portal and you don't know your customer and you don't have empathy and your team doesn't have empathy, you're going to fail. Because you can't design it with being in their shoes because you've never been in their shoes. We do stuff for the healthcare industry. None of us are doctors. So how do we design a system for healthcare workers if none of us have been in the healthcare industry? It's through insight and research and making sure, not that it's a research firm that does it and hands us a research document. The most important thing in a research engagement is that the team that is designing and building it, they're the ones involved in the research. They're there talking to the customers. The most powerful product design decisions that we've made are ones where we saw a customer put a sticky note on a monitor or print out something and then bring it over to their desk because they're doing something. Those are areas for opportunity, and if the developer wasn't there to see that and develop empathy, they're not going to know how important this feature is when they're developing it. And they're not going to remind the designer, hey, what about that thing that happened here? Third, essential is everything is a prototype. So as you look through the deliverables that we give in the prototype process, and a lot of companies call this the design process, where they have discover, design, develop, deliver as their process steps. Design is not a process step. You can't hand a design over and have the designers walk away from a project. Design is a discipline that is used throughout an entire process of creating great software. Design will help you make technological decisions because they'll design something and then you'll check and make sure that the CMS or the BPM that you're using can fulfill on the design requirements. They have to be along the way. And then if the technological thing that you have can't do it, you have to have the designers design something that still works that can also work with it with your technological ecosystem. So what that means is as we're prototyping, in the prototyping phase of a project, every design, every visual design, every wireframe, everything, every user flow is a prototype that is materialized once we're actually building. Another version of a prototype, these are vision demos, where we take to sell up internally, because every large organization has a committee of people that have to know what we're building. The Maven goes back with a vision demo and sells that internally and says, this is what we're building, this is how we're going to build it. Vision demos are powerful internal sales tools, and they also can be used with customers to say, this is what we're building for you, don't leave. And then there's obviously actual physical, clickable prototypes that we put to figure out interaction models and figure out whether or not customers are going to be able to use and interact freely without having to learn anything with the system. Essential number 4. So in those circumstances where you have to make technological decisions, when you're selecting the technical solution before the designs are baked, and that has to happen, the most frustrating thing as an agency, as a firm that develops software, is having to make such large design compromises because the API is bad in the system that we're integrating with. And the system that we're integrating with was chosen 6 months ago. The number one qualifier we have when helping our clients select a back-end system or a technological platform is how good the API is. And the way we qualify how good the API is, the first question you need to ask the vendor is, does their own UI use their API? Does their system use the API? If they're eating their own dog food on the API, that's a really good indication that they built it with an API layer first, and then they put their own UI on top of it. The second point I want to make on this is their UI is not good enough. It never will be. So if they say, and you get an iPhone app out of the gate with our infrastructure, that you just deploy an iPhone app, don't do that. That is a complete failure on user experience. Your customers will leave you in droves. A survey we did just recently with Harris Interactive showed that once a customer uses a mobile app from your company and they don't like it, they will never download a mobile app from you again. You're done. You have one bullet in the gun for mobile. Don't use somebody else's mobile implementation as your test into the mobile market. It will ruin your brand for a very long time. Essential number 4. Oh no, sorry. I meant to, got lost there for a second. On this, a CIO I was just talking to last week said his SAP is probably the worst thing that we have to integrate with. I'm sorry if you're here from SAP. It sucks. I haven't met one end user that is using an implemented SAP UI that is like, thank God we switched to SAP, it's wonderful. Never happens. This CIO inherited their SAP implementation. Very common story. They spent $1 million on the SAP license and $20 million on the implementation of it, and they went bankrupt, had to come out of bankruptcy from it. And the implementation looked exactly like their old systems, except for it was harder to use. And it's primarily because, as you talk to him, he says, we didn't have anybody that owned it. Read, he didn't have a Maven. And it's because the way they implemented it, they can't build anything on top of it. It has to be SAP UI. And it's horrible. So he said, and I quote, SAP implementation is the gift that keeps on taking, because every time we need to make a change, it costs us a lot more money than if we had just home baked it. SAP doesn't have a good API infrastructure. Essential number 5, solve the highest risk items first. And this comes back to just an implementation tactic that we always use. And you hear these terms, you hear agile and waterfall and and extreme and lean UX and rational unified process. In reality, all of those suit different engagements in different times. So we deploy all kinds of different development methodologies, but they all come back to this one thing. If you have a Maven that set a really good vision for the product, you've given the team insight and empathy to your customer, you've prototyped what the experience should be, you give an optionality on the technological solution, the team should be able to self-identify the high-risk items and build those first, as long as they're incented on that. So whatever iterative process you use doesn't matter, as long as you're qualifying every so often, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. What are the high-risk items? Let's develop those things first. 5 areas where Mavens see return on investment. These are, as I look back at the 300 or so projects we've worked on in the last little bit, these are the 5 areas where our clients see the biggest ROI. And a lot of them see all of them. The first one is the obvious one. It's why everybody says we need a better customer experiences to increase conversion rates. So that's a really easy one to calculate. If we increase our conversion rates, if we set a metric that we're going to increase our conversion rates by 2%, this thing will pay for itself in X amount of time. That one's really easy. Everybody uses that one as the one to use. But ones that aren't so obvious, reduced hard costs. A large candy company has that we were working with has a sales team that prints out a binder of sales collateral every week. It's about that thick. They have 5,000 salespeople, and they take that binder with them. They lug it with them to the grocery stores to sell what they have. And we quantified a field sales enablement application for them to just put it on an iPad. It paid for itself in 4 months with just paper and ink savings. It was an office supply budget savings. So look for ways how you can drive ROI by saving hard costs. Those are real costs that your CFO will go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of savings here. Reduce support costs. So McAfee, there's a lot of companies that will say that this is one of their metrics actually. It's bubbling up quite a bit, where a company is trying to drive down their customer support calls. Some companies, the way they do that is they take the 800 number off of their website, so it's hard to find their customer support. If they just built a better experience or a better product, a digital product, it would have a much more drastic savings on their customer support, and it would also reduce customer frustration, so increase the customer lifetime value. One product that we built, that we designed for, was the new Linksys networking software to set up your home network. And when it was released, I got a phone call from the product manager, and he said to us, we thought our customer support system went down. We had to audit it to realize that people just stopped calling us when they were setting up their home network. Increased employee efficiency is another ROI metric that we see quite a bit. Our own internal research indicates that we're seeing a reduction in computer time by at least 50% when deploying intranet applications. And there's real easy ROI calculations to that. So one example of this is Adobe Systems. We rewrote, it's not a sexy application, but it was for them. We wrote their bug tracking tool. They still use PeopleSoft as the database, but they also use PeopleSoft's front end. Almost as bad as SAP, not quite. And PeopleSoft's front end was rewritten with a web UI sitting on top of PeopleSoft. And they went from tracking bugs, taking 15 minutes, tracking bugs for their software, from 15 minutes a bug to 2 minutes a bug. And their ROI was $400,000 a month in employee efficiency. Those kinds of things are missed when you're building a business case. Look for those opportunities when you're building a business case for initiating a user experience approach. The last one is probably the most significant savings. And it's hard to get companies to measure this because they have this bucket called maintenance. And whenever you issue an RFP for a software product, the average for a software product build, the maintenance cost on that build is 5 times. The maintenance cost is 5 times that of the build, and you don't recognize that, and you don't even realize, most companies don't even contemplate that when they're undergoing an initiative. The number one cause for high maintenance costs, and if you think about your own maintenance costs, it's responding to user need that you didn't contemplate when you're building the product up front. A vast majority of them are not bugs, are not things, are not system upgrades. They are, a customer wants to do this, he can't do this, we need to do that, and we didn't think about it. And does building that costs 100 times more after the thing is deployed than if it was thought about before the thing was deployed. Significant savings. Nobody thinks about this. It's hard, the reason is it's hard to quantify because we have this thing called maintenance that everything goes into that typically isn't segmented between new feature or a bug. Finally, 5 things that everybody should be passionate about. So in technology, it helps our customers to start developing the vocabulary and what to look for in creating and designing a great UI. So I'm going to frame this into 5 simple words. The first, and 5 simple things to think about when you're looking at UI and qualifying designs and qualifying things that your design team is coming at you with. First, very simple thing, effective human interfaces must be opaque. And what I mean by opaque is sometimes we think that it's cool to see the technology behind it, but if your user sees the technology, if they notice the interface, you failed. I used to work at Warner Brothers, and my first day at Warner Brothers in feature post-production and special effects, and my mentor there walked me through the lot, and he said, have you ever been in a movie where you've said, wow, that's a really cool special effect? I said, yeah. He said, we failed in that circumstance. If you notice the special effect, you failed. If your customers notice the UI, you failed. It needs to be opaque. You just need to get in and get out. Get to what they're trying to get to. Second thing, effective human interfaces must be approachable. And approachable, what I mean by approachable, and this is kind of the same thing as opaque. It's related, but it's more about business silos telling you what needs to be in the UI versus the technology, obscuring the technology. You need to also obscure your business processes. If you, Ron Rogowski, is he still here? He probably left. Ron Rogowski said to me once, he says, if you ever want to know how unorganized a company is, go take a look at their website. And this is a great example. I actually shop at Express sometimes, went to their website to grab some shirts, and you can tell every single silo in the business weighed in. They have social, and they have a form because they needed more conversion. They needed more people to mail to. They have the sale. They have a music player. They have in different places sign up for an email. They have McAfee Secure. I came here to buy a shirt, and what I'm exposed to is their business dysfunction. So, approachable means just let me get to what I want to get to. Effective human interfaces must be adaptive. For a lot, this is the most classic example I can come up with. Is a lot of companies make me conform to their web experience instead of their web experience conforming to me. A mobile website for a large organization like VMware, they should have a mobile site. But there's a lot of other more tactical examples that are relational to your business, but this is the most classic one. Make sure that the experience adapts to the user, not the other way around. Then it must be intuitive. Can we put this guy out of business? I don't know if you know who this guy is, Video Professor. I hate his commercials. He's in Colorado. He doesn't have a great reputation in Colorado either, if we want to gossip a little bit. But this guy is horrible. He serves a need that serves people that consider themselves not technology savvy because we're building interfaces that aren't intuitive. And finally, the most obvious one, effective human interfaces must be beautiful. And I don't think I need to go into too much, but too many examples. I think we can all think of examples of UIs that we've come across that have just been horrible. And you know what? To my mom, most interfaces or forms she has to fill out look like this to her. I don't know where to click. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid I'm going to break my computer if I touch the wrong button. This is how my mom views most of the sites that she navigates to, or most of the software she uses. That actually was it. I'd love to take questions if you guys have questions or challenges, or call BS on me, or not. Yeah, shoot.
So what's your advice to customers that have millions of dollars invested in the ERP software, whether SAP or whatever it is?
So what do you do for those customers that have bought SAP and they have to implement stuff on top of it?
Yeah. Of course, the choice is simple.
After you're done consoling them.
It's either with that or redesign your UI.
Yeah, so you don't have to throw. There are lots of. Well, first of all, SAP does sort of offer you an add-on solution that you can purchase that if you've written SAP in the right way, you can use to put UIs on top of. There are other companies that are that are sprouting up. Next Axiom is actually one of them that I can think of off the top of my head that can obscure SAP implementations and make them an API. So you put a layer in between SAP and the UI, you create some middleware in between SAP, you create some middleware in your middleware, on top of your middleware.
That's exactly the point, because the train doesn't stop at UI. One of the statements that was in the presentation was lipstick on a pig. So unless you go back and address the business processes, just
Yes.
showing the UI is not
Yeah.
going to cut it.
Yes.
So now whatever using the investment in ERP software for as a database.
Yeah, yeah. So the point that he's making is a really good one, and that is, in reality, the UI is the abstraction of your business processes. And if SAP was implemented incorrectly, it is abstracting the wrong processes for your users, and so you have to rethink that. You have to rethink. I know this is a scary. If user experience matters, if it does, and there's huge ROI for your company, you can't put lipstick on a pig and expect it. You can't skin it for usability, which we've gotten those requests. Can you take our crappy UI that's already deployed, and can you skin it for usability? No, you can't, because it's about user flows and understanding the user flows. And most of the implementations were designed by technologists and engineers. Sometimes, if you're lucky, an HFI professional who still doesn't get the emotive piece of creating a great UI. And you have to throw out a lot of stuff a lot of work you've already done. So hopefully, my plea is to make those, again, flipping the decision making to define the UI early, understand your customers early before you start going down that road.
How do you square that statement with Agile? It almost sounds like you're saying give them the whole UI.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you square it with Agile? And Agile can be a really good word or a really bad word, depending on what customer you're talking to of ours. An Agile development process, you can't design in an Agile development process. It's, one of my lead experienced architects, he's like, okay, so this week I'm going to design all the submit buttons. You can't design in that fashion. You have to understand where you're going. So what I'm talking about, in essence, in an Agile development process, we're talking about a long sprint zero. So understanding the direction and the framework in which you're developing towards, and spending a little bit more time on design than you normally would up front, and then designing in an Agile process as you're uncovering the highest risk items. The problem with Agile also is everybody implements it differently. Like, there's this notion of Wagile, which basically winds up giving you the worst of both worlds. So it's really about the team, and the team having empathy and a maven. The process is really secondary, depending on the process is really secondary if you have the right team. Yeah. So let me make sure I understand the question correctly. So what you're asking is, there's certain things that there's a certain business process that can have multiple UIs. How do you account for that?
No, there's a certain function in the system.
Yep.
That the tool provides, like I said, either I'm used to multiple business processes, which could apply to multiple interfaces for that same function, which is not a bad thing. It's just we need to design for that.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, that is true. A lot of circumstances, one function will have. It is appropriate to have multiple UIs. It is appropriate. Sometimes it's not. It really goes back to ROI. So a lot of organizations will say, we want one UI for our field sales team, our accounting team. This is SAP, really. Our field sales team, our accounting team, our customer support folks. And in reality, those are probably 6 UIs, not one. So the field sales organization may need a UI for quoting, and they may need a UI for the CRM. And depending on how big your field sales team is, it's probably worth the investment to do both. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. That was not too good, but you're right.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So on that point, the goals of these users are different. So I don't know why you would expect the same UI. You would want a different UI depending on what goal they're trying to address.
Yeah. So I agree. Yeah, we're agreeing. So you would want a different UI to address the different goals. Sometimes it's not as clear as that. So sometimes you have different sales personas where each one would require a different UI for the sales team. And I'm not blanketing saying that you need to write 8 UIs. But the other thing that I didn't get to today, a much bigger topic, is is this notion of a UI ecosystem. So looking at one constituent and one work stream and defining that UI, all of a sudden you have customer journeys or user journeys that are incongruent. So there's a conversation that should be happening organizationally that's a layer up that talks about what should the UI be, what should the UI ecosystem, what should the experience ecosystem for our employees and our customers be, paint a really high-level picture of what you're going to do, and then start defining the interfaces for each one of them. If you're starting with a blank slate, you start with the ecosystem first, and then you define the UIs, and then you define the infrastructure that supports it. I can't think of anybody that has the opportunity to do that, but if you're thinking about a utopia, that's how you would do it. Yeah.
Nice work. I like the beginning about the RFP, where you're asked for things that you say are impossible. What do you do in those situations if it's a new client? Do you mostly bail, or do you have different techniques?
We don't bail. We almost never say no, but we get them to say no, in essence. So we say, we're not going to do it this way, but we can do it this way, which accomplishes the same goals, but it's different than the way you're asking for us to do. So we almost always insist, and sometimes when we're asked to make recommendations, we do with the caveat that says, we think one of these 3 CMSs are going to work, but we want to do a little bit more work before we make a final decision. And that's usually how we approach it. But it's rare that we bail. The only circumstance where we bail on an initiative, and we do, is if we don't believe in it. And that seems really weird to say, but there's certain circumstances that a client will come to us and we'll hear what they're trying to do, and you're like, that makes apps, why would you do that? And we've taken those projects on in the past, and somebody in that organization asks the same question, and it blows up our relationship. So we've just walked away from that. The most extreme example, funny example, is a guy came to us and said, I own the patent. This is a startup, so it's not really applicable. But he says, I own the patent on the app that's going to make your iPhone a mirror. It's the app that you click on it, and he says, how much is it going to cost for me to build that app? And it's really just, if you turn your iPhone off, you can kind of use it as a mirror, but that's the best you can do. And he says, I own the patent, I want to build it. And just to make him go, he says it's going to be about $400K. And he said, okay, sign right up the yes. And I'm like, no, forget it. We're not, things like that happen. Other things times we ask questions is they ask us, we want to build a mobile version of our website or a mobile version of our application. And we ask why, because not everything works for mobile. And they say, because my CEO says we need one. We can't be successful in that circumstance. We're not actually going to be serving customers in that circumstance. Anybody else? Did I go short or long? Am I good? I think I went a little long. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.